Good evening and welcome to the annual budget webinar on waste. We appreciate the time you've taken to tune in and find out more about this important topic. My name is Carol Hayward and I'll be your MC tonight. Joining me are a number of councillors. We have Deputy Mayor and Councillor for Franklin Ward, Councillor Bill Cashmore. We have Chair of the Finance Committee, Desley Simpson. We have Deputy Chair of the Environment and Climate Change Committee, Pippa Coombe. We also have Councillors Shane Henderson, Chris Darby, Paul Young, and I think that's it at this moment. I think we may be expecting a couple more to join us later. From Council, we have a number of staff who are our subject matter experts. We have Director Barry Potter, Parul Sood, Sarah Leclerc and Alex Kirkham from our waste team. And we also have Andrew Duncan from Finance. The annual budget sets the activities, services and investments for the coming financial year and details how we might pay for them. The consultation is essential as it provides you, our community, with an opportunity to have your say about what essential services, facilities and projects and programmes you would like to see prioritised. As you might imagine, this is not a business as usual budget. The ongoing effects of the pandemic, climate change, rising costs, growing demand for our services and government policy changes are all key considerations. There are three key areas of focus: faster and new action on climate change, a flexible response to budget pressures, and an efficient waste minimisation. Consultation will run until the 28th of March, and tonight's webinar is an opportunity to understand more about the proposed changes to Auckland's waste services. We will shortly be hearing a presentation from our staff, and then our elected members will be open to questions, which you can raise through the Q&A tab, which is at the bottom of the screen. The session is being recorded and will be made available online along with questions and answers that are raised. We're expecting tonight's session to take about 90 minutes. So I'd like to start by handing over to our staff to run through the presentation before we begin the Q&A for the evening. Thank you, Sarah. I think you're starting us off.
Yeah. I'll unmute myself, that would help. My name is Sarah Leclerc. I'm the Waste Planning Manager within Waste Solutions. I'm going to start the presentation. I'll be handing over at point to Alex Kirkham, who will also be presenting this evening. Then she'll hand back to me, and then I'll hand it on to Andrew Duncan, who will describe some other aspects of our the proposals for waste. So I'm just setting some context. First of all, Auckland has a goal of zero waste to landfill by 2040. This vision underpins the actions that we're putting in place. And one of the main drivers for this policy change is to get our domestic waste to reduce and to maximise recycling and recovery of our curbside waste. At the moment, half of our region pays for its curbside waste through the rates, and just under half pays through the pay-as-you-throw system. And the intention was to move to a pay-as-you-throw system for the whole region. But over the past couple of years, we've been examining tonnage data to understand whether that pay-as-you-throw system was achieving the expected outcome, which was to create a financial disincentive to drive down household waste. We've examined tonnage data from approximately 30,000 households in each of the rate user pays, so it's the pay-as-you-throw areas and also the rates funded areas. The research that we've undertaken found that the pay-as-you-throw system was not having the effect of minimising waste. And in fact, households in pay-as-you-throw areas were generating similar waste tonnages to households who pay for this service annually through their rates. The ability for customers to switch and change providers under pay-as-you-throw limits council's ability to use either price or volume to promote waste minimisation. And customers in pay-as-you-throw areas can also readily and easily access additional refuse volumes by purchasing extra bags or bins from private collectors, which customers in rates funded areas cannot do. We believe Auckland Council can have the greatest influence over waste behaviour when it is servicing the majority of households, which is what the rates funded service enables. With a rates funded system, we can use a combination of container sizes and collection frequencies to drive the greatest uptake of the diversion services that we offer through curbside recycling and our future food scraps service. And the efficiencies that we will gain will enable Council to deliver more targeted and consistent education programmes to the parts of the community who need them, to assist households who do need that sort of more help in understanding how to minimise their waste. We've also looked at examples of other cities that have achieved good waste minimisation, and some of the top performers are using a rates-based service. For example, when Hamilton City launched a fortnightly refuse service and weekly food scraps collection, they saw high yields of food collected through the food scrap service and a further 10% overall reduction in residual waste. Next slide, please. I'll pass to Alex.
Thanks, Sarah. Can everyone hear me? You can hear me? Yeah. So Auckland Council is recommending that from 2024-25, all Aucklanders will pay for refuse services through an annual rates-based charge. So this will be a change for around half of the region who currently pay for their refuse services using a bin tag, and this is what we call a pay-as-you-throw system. This change will affect residents in former Waitakere, North Shore, Franklin and Papakura, who at the moment have to buy a bin tag each time they want to put their rubbish out. And it will also apply to Rodney residents who currently don't have access to the Auckland Council refuse service. So this change in policy direction is different from what was outlined in the Waste Management and Minimisation Plan, which had planned to charge all of Auckland using a region-wide pay-as-you-throw model. So this change in policy direction is why we need to consult with yourselves now. Auckland Council is now proposing to charge for all waste and recycling services via the rates system. So offering 3 different refuse bin sizes, continuing with the 120 litre bin, which is the current standard bin size offering we have. We also do currently have a larger 240 litre bin in some areas, and we'll be adding a smaller option of an 80 litre bin to accommodate the needs of low waste producing households. So these 3 bin sizes will be charged at different rates to the ratepayer. Next slide, please. So getting people to use the food scrap service is important from a climate and emissions perspective. The largest contributor to carbon emissions from landfills is the breakdown of organic material such as food scraps and green waste and paper and timber and things like that. So we have the opportunity to really drive change here around methane emissions coming from landfill. Equally, fuel waste collection vehicles and more efficient routes will also contribute to a reduction in vehicle emissions. So it's sort of a double win if we can get people using the food scrap service and we're providing the service through the rate system. The other driver behind this decision is cost and equity. Council conducted an analysis of the costs to deliver services under each funding model, and we found that the rates funded option is more financially resilient and services can be delivered at a lower overall cost per household. This is particularly important when we're considering the needs of higher waste producing households and households on low incomes. COVID-19 has not only put pressure and strain on council's budget, but on household budgets as well. The rates funded system will ensure that the cost of waste services will remain affordable for households at all income levels. And that's particularly important going forward. Low-income households being able to access fair and affordable services reduces other risks, such as illegal dumping when people have too much waste that they just can't get rid of. So next slide, please. So we understand that there have been some misconceptions around costs circulating in social media, so we thought it would be helpful to address some of these. One of the key points that needs to be clarified is that households in pay-as-you-throw areas are already paying $142 in their rates for recycling and regional waste initiatives. So the only addition to the rates as part of this policy change is the refuse component. In other words, it's not a new charge of $300. It's just the refuse component. There's also a misconception that pay-as-you-throw is much cheaper. And yes, for some households, very low waste producing households, costs may be lower under pay-as-you-throw, but for most, costs will be lower under rates funded. We needed to select the model that provided the best cost saving for the most people. Under the future proposed service, low waste generating households will be able to take that smaller 80-litre rubbish bin at a cost of around $124 a year. So when council moves to a fortnightly collection as outlined in the waste plan, this charge is expected to drop further to around $90 a year. We appreciate that this is more than what some very waste conscious households pay now for rubbish disposal, but it reflects the true cost of delivering the service. And the model we've proposed is the least expensive option. We're hopeful that this smaller bin will also incentivize even more households to reduce their waste. Another misconception is that people in rates funded areas get their rubbish collected for free. This is not the case. The cost of rubbish collection is paid for through a targeted rate currently of $150.06. There have been some misconceptions that council is revenue raising. Rates are set based on the cost of providing the service only, and all savings are passed on to the customer. In other words, council does not make any money on these collection services. I'm going to pass back to, sorry, I've jumped ahead to a slide, but everything I covered in the last slide was these costs. And so Sarah's going to pick it up from here and talk you through what those costs are like.
The next slide, please. That's great. So the purpose of this slide is to provide a sort of apples for apples comparison between what a customer who lives in a current pay-as-you-throw area could expect to pay per year in 2024 and 2025 if we were to stay on the current hybrid system. These costs do not include the food scraps targeted rate, as currently most people do not pay that, so therefore it'd be more difficult to comprehend. So the figure in yellow in the light blue circle is the projected cost for the weekly refuse collections and fortnightly recycling collections. This total price has been adjusted to reflect, fortnightly recycling collections, right. This total price has been adjusted to reflect the increase in the central government waste levy for new municipal disposal that we know is coming, plus an adjustment for inflation. So this equates to a tag price for a 120-litre bin of $5.20 compared with $4.10 today. So if we were to move to a regional pay-as-you-throw model, our modelling based on estimated costs provided by our current contractors shows that this cost would rise to $353 per year for fortnightly recycling and a weekly refuse collection. But as you will see, if we were to move to a regional rates funded model, we estimate that this annual cost would fall to $314 per year for fortnightly recycling and a weekly refuse collection. And that's with a 120-litre bin. So just slowing down on the next one. So this slide provides the same apples for apples comparison between what a customer who lives in a current rates funded area could expect to pay per year in 2024, 2025, if we were to stay on the current hybrid system. So these costs do not, once again, include the food scraps targeted rate, as households in those areas are currently not paying that, and we'll come on to the cost of that separately. Once again, the figure in the in yellow in the light blue circle is the projected cost for a weekly refuse collection with a 120-litre bin, so that's the medium-sized bin, and fortnightly refuse collections, fortnightly recycling collections. And again, this total price has been adjusted to reflect the increase in the central government waste levy for disposal, and plus an adjustment for inflation. So if we were to move to a regional pay-as-you-throw model, and our modelling based again on those estimates provided by our current contractors shows that this cost would rise to $353 for fortnightly recycling and weekly refuse collection, so that's $30 more. And if we were to move to a regional rates funded model, we estimate that this annual cost would fall to $314 for fortnightly recycling and a weekly refuse collection. So as you see, there are savings to be made by moving to the regional rates funded model based on our the modelling that we've done and the revised contractor costs. So have the next slide, please. So what we're showing here is the difference between of offering the different size bins for the different levels of waste production. So we estimate that for the typical user using a 120 litre bin, it would cost $375 a year for all 3 bin services under a weekly refuse collection scenario. And this equates to a refuse charge of $187 per year for a 120 litre bin. So that's the medium sized bin. So, and $61 per year for food scraps and $127 per year is the base rate for recycling, inorganic collection and the regional waste services. Click. That's right. So if for households that do produce more waste, there is the option of a 240 litre bin for so twice the volume for an additional $89. But there's a saving to be made for low waste producers in the weekly collection of their 80 litre bin, which can reduce to $312 per year for all 3 services, with a saving of $63. So that equates to a refuse service charge of $124 per year for that 80 litre bin for a weekly service. So for those low waste producers, there are cost savings to be made. So that concludes the slides that we have on the proposed move to a rates funded regional service. And I'm handing over now to Andrew Duncan, who's going to talk about the other aspects of the waste proposals.
Good evening. Sarah and Alex talked earlier about the food scrap service as part of the 3 bin service. Council decided a number of years ago to introduce the food scrap service. It's already available in Papakura and parts of the North Shore and will now be rolled out across the city, starting with some additional parts of the North Shore and Waitakere next year and the rest of the city in the following year. The charge for a full year's service next year will be $71. And for those parts of the region getting that service for a portion of the year, the charge will be commensurate with the amount of time you'll be receiving the service. And similarly, when it's rolled out into other parts of the city. Next slide, please. Now, alongside harmonising the services across the city, we're also looking to harmonise the way in which we charge for the services. And there are some parts of the city at present where people can opt out, properties can opt out of the council's service, but also opting out of some of the council's charges. And we think at the time we harmonise the services across the city, we should also harmonise how we charge for them. Next slide, please. Now, this is part of this charging is based on charging every property the same amount. Now, we refer to these as also we're going to charge separately used or inhabited parts of a rating unit the same amount for the services they receive. So some rating units have got one title, but have multiple different activities going on inside them. So you could imagine shops in a shopping mall or a house with a minor unit attached. And by setting our charges per SUIP, we ensure that we treat shops in a shopping mall in the same way that we would treat shops on a main street. And one of the key elements of our proposal is that effective from 1 July 2023, so that won't start July this year, but July the following year, there'll be a minimum charge to all SUIPs to pay for the regional initiatives we undertake across the city that bring broad waste management goals for the whole city. The next slide, please. Now, at present, there are some residential units with properties with 2 to 9 units on them. And within the old Auckland City area, some of these have been able to opt out of council services. Now, we think that across the city as a whole, we're able to provide good waste management services to properties of this size, and therefore they should all be getting the council service and paying for it. Now, those properties in Auckland Central that currently pay for fewer services than the number of parts of a property they have will be able to continue on with that until they sell the property. Now, the key reason for bringing these properties into our waste services is to ensure that we're treating them, charging them fairly, but also to bring their rubbish management into the council auspices, because we can do that efficiently. It brings efficiencies to the service delivery. Next slide, please. Now, while we can deliver services to smaller scale multi-unit residential properties, there are some larger scale properties where it's not practical for us to deliver the service in the standard way we do elsewhere. Now, within the Auckland City area, there are some apartment blocks that have been able to opt out from the former Auckland City Council area that have opted out of our services and they're not charged. Whereas in other parts of the city, there may be some apartment buildings that are being charged despite not being able to use our services and having their own services. So what we're proposing is that in the future, properties with more than 10 residential units will be able to opt out of the council services if we're unable to provide them with a satisfactory service. Next slide. Now, there are also some non-residential properties, quite a lot in Auckland, and our curbside refuse service is not really suited to many of these properties. So we're going to allow any non-residential property to opt out of the council service. They'll still have to pay the minimum base charge I referred to earlier. Now, we could check whether we can provide them a service or not, but we felt that that was impractical given the number of properties and the wide variety of waste management needs they have. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. We're now happy to take and answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you to our staff for the presentation, which gave us some clarity about the proposed changes. I imagine you've got some questions, and I've already seen that there are a few in the Q&A box. Before we begin, I'd like to ask our panelists to flag their top of mind concerns and priorities while I want you, our audience, to begin thinking about what you might like to ask us tonight and fire them through. Before I start, I'd like to pass on apologies from Councillor Richard Hills, who was unable to join us this evening as he's attending the Rainbow Communities Advisory Panel meeting tonight. And I'd like to acknowledge we have Councillor Christine Fletcher and Fiso Collins have both joined us during the presentation. I'm not sure if there are any other councillors who've joined us, but if there are, if you could please turn your cameras on so that we can acknowledge that you're here as well. So if I can go to Councillor Bill Cashmore for any thoughts from you about top of mind concerns.
Thanks, Carol, and thank you to all the staff who've made the presentations. First of all, Mayor Phil presents his apologies. He is unable to attend tonight. He's got other commitments on council business, so he's a busy man, as you can well imagine. Waste is one of those things that we often just take for granted, isn't it? It's a vitally important, essential business that council does. It is not a business for profit, it is a business for service. And this is what this refiguring of it slightly is all about. And it's about getting you the best value for money, certainty for contracts, and also delivering on reducing our waste to landfill, which is our primary #1 target. The tag system had its flaws. We believe that a rates-based system where you pay for the services that you receive on a regional scale will provide us with the economies of scale to provide you a better value for money service. Like so many of things that council does, it's often not sort of recognised as a great council service that goes up and lifts. It's not the opera house. You've got waste, you've got reticulated water, you've got wastewater and stormwater. You've got things like your local parks, your libraries, your playgrounds, things that we as a council provide you that are used in interface with Aucklanders every day, sometimes multiple times, is a critical part of the services that this council provides you. And I'd like to thank all the people who have advised and providing those services for the work that they do. And sometimes there'll be slip-ups and mistakes made, but generally speaking, we have increased the level of service provision and getting better results for our environment than we've seen previously. So thank you very much, and happy to take any questions going forward, Carol. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Cashmore. If I could ask some of the other councillors if they have any thoughts they'd like to add and any kind of areas they'd like people to think about. Maybe Councillor Simpson.
Look, from my perspective, I think it's really important to provide the best value for money. I mean, the Deputy Mayor mentioned this as well, and this provides the most cost-effective option for the ratepayers of Auckland across the board. Look, I know that it does seem a bit funny. You'd think that pay as you throw would cost less. I mean, I've challenged the staff on this a lot, you know, because you could reduce your waste and surely it would cost less. But I think Parul will talk a little bit more about that, maybe because the data that came through showed that actually wasn't the case. So I think it's important to try and be cost effective and still achieve a good outcome. And that's really where this proposal sits from my perspective. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. So we have now got quite a few questions that have been coming through. So we're going to start with some of those questions. And the first question is really one for staff. It's do you have a link to the data that shows pay as you throw and flat rates give similar results? Could I ask one of the waste team to answer that?
I can take that, Carol. We do have a link to the reports that have gone to councillors. And thank you for the question, Jeff. Happy to share that with you. I'm afraid we don't have that right now, but we're happy to share that with you.
And then the second question, which is also one for the staff, is can households opt out of the waste disposal portion? I think that may have been answered during the presentation, but if you could please confirm.
Sarah, do you want to go?
I can confirm that one. No, the option is that the all households who are eligible for the service would be charged the waste disposal portion of the rates. So the no opt-outs available for the individual households.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And then the third question again is for the waste team. Are there other cities in New Zealand who've had more success with minimising waste through a rates funded service as opposed to pay as you throw? I think Parul, you're going to answer that one.
I think Sarah in her presentation talked about the recent example with Hamilton in terms of what they've done there with introduction of a food scrap service and the ability, and they actually went through a fortnightly collection, which actually enabled that to happen. So more diversion happened with their recycling and food scraps and lesser waste going into landfill. COVID's had impact on every city in terms of what's happening with rubbish, but there are examples where they've actually managed to either do it based on volume, where you've got different size bins as what you're seeing in our proposals, or looking at looking at how frequently is the material collected. So that does have an impact. So do you want to add anything there?
Yes, we've also seen the recent example in Tauranga, where they have recently moved to a rates-based service and has seen also reductions in their waste tonnages. We can also provide more information with the research that we've done on other councils around New Zealand.
Thank you. So there are a number of questions that are coming through. I'm just working my way through. There are a few duplicates, so I'm just going to move down. So we have, will bags still be available for hard to reach rural communities?
The short answer to that is yes, they will be.
Great, thank you, nice and quick. And then this next one, how does your current data account for household data collected by household rubbish collected by private contractors?
Alex.
Do you want me to answer that one? Yeah. So when we did our analysis, we did a per capita analysis, which did take into account how much of the community Auckland Council services and how much is coming from the private market. So we did factor that in the private tonnages.
Thank you, Alex. So, right. got a question here around whether it's possible to have a smaller 40 litres bin, as it takes 6 weeks or more to fill a single rubbish bag.
The idea here is to start with the 80 litre. We are looking at what else can happen with a smaller bin, whether you need to have a false bottom for the 80 litre to actually be able to grab by the truck to be able to be emptied. So I think the proposal on the table at the moment is to go for a 80, 120 and a 240. And in the future, we could look at other sizes as well.
Thank you. Another question for our waste team. What percentage of the current food scrap bins are used?
Do you want me to take that one, Sarah? Yeah, so at the moment, I believe we have a participation rate of around 35%. So that's customers who are using the service generally, not necessarily every week, but they are actively using the service. That's in Papakura, sorry.
Perhaps you could we could just take a moment to explain a little bit more about how the food scrap system works in practice. Are you able to give us a bit more detail?
Yeah, so actually the only areas we have food scrap service operating at the moment is in the pay-as-you-throw areas, but the customers there also still have a weekly refuse collection. So in terms of the volume of the bin that they have available, there's nothing really driving them to really utilize that food scraps bin in terms of not having enough room in their bin. So so that's part of the discussion that in the waste plan around going to a fortnightly service with refuse, because the food scraps will be weekly and the refuse collection will be fortnightly, and that will drive people to get that I guess that smellier waste that they want to get out of their refuse bin and into the food scraps bin. So it's quite a big motivator. Yeah.
Thanks.
Just adding, Carol, sorry, just adding to that, I think you were wondering as to how does it work. The service, as Alex said, is available for Papakura and parts of North Shore residents. They have a weekly collection. You put your bin out with your food scraps in, which are predominantly material coming out of which is either wasted food or vegetable peelings, etc. And it gets collected. And at the moment, it is going to a composting facility. But in the future, to deal with the amount of material that will come out of Auckland, there is a purpose-built facility that is being built, which will process food scraps based on an anaerobic digestion process, which is not composting, but it will digest the material and produce a digestate which goes back on land. But also you have energy and energy coming out of it to feed hothouses or to grow tomatoes. So it's almost a circular option for that material to be dealt with.
Thank you, Parul. So this is taken outside of Auckland to be dealt with.
That's right. The plant that is being built is in Reparoa, and you would wonder why is it going so far and how would that be beneficial? So one thing is the trucks that are taking the material out to Reparoa are actually backhauling product. So there's material coming in from Reparoa and food scraps is going down. So there's no wasted truck movement that is happening. And the other reason when you think about placing an organic facility is you think about where do you place it. You either place it close to where the outputs can be used, or you place it to where the material is. So in this case, it is better to place where the outputs can be used, because as I said, it's next to a greenhouse where they can utilize all the material coming out of the facility for beneficial reuse.
Thank you. There's been a couple of questions in the chat around people who want to use their own food waste to continue for their own purposes. I know we've talked about opting out earlier, so I just want to clarify again, is there any opportunity to opt out of the food waste system?
What we've learned on waste, and I think it is a service that is supported by everyone in Auckland. There is no opt-out for the service, so everybody will pay a flat fee, which at the moment I think sits at about $70 per year.
Thank you, Parul. So the next question, we'll change topics slightly, is really round about the targeted waste fee. So the question really is around whether or not a targeted waste fee will discourage people to reduce their waste. So I wonder if we could spend a little bit more time exploring that in more detail. I know we had some facts in the presentation, but perhaps Alex, is that something that you could go into more detail on?
I'm not sure. Sarah, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So we believe that a targeted waste fee will help to reduce waste. We believe that there are 3 options available at different bin sizes to encourage people to, you can opt for a smaller bin. So there's an 80-litre bin option available at a lower cost. So, but what we are trying to do with this is also accommodate those people who need more volume. So, so there is a 240-litre bin available as well. So, but what we will also be able to do by running one efficient system is also to be able to spend a lot of time focusing on our education aspects and really running programs to really encourage people to how to divert their waste, to make good use of the diversion services, so the recycling and the food scrap service, and also making sure that households understand options for diverting as much waste from landfill as possible. So it just gives council that opportunity by running one really efficient service, gives us more time to spend and more energy to spend on making sure that we support those people who need that support to reduce their waste.
If I could just add in there, Carol, I think the evidence that the team looked at showed tonnage coming out of the 2 areas. So we looked at households that put out rubbish from a rates funded area, and we looked at households that put out rubbish from a user pays areas. And if you looked at the tonnages there, it did not reflect a massive difference. So what might happen is that in a user pays areas, you put out rubbish maybe every fortnightly, but maybe your bins are jammed. And similar to that, if you're in a rates funded area, you might be putting out your bin weekly, but they're not as heavy. So I guess the difference, and I guess we've also heard anecdotes from residents to say, I live in a rates funded area, but I'm very waste conscious. So I don't jam my bin just because I have the capacity to do so. So I think it is about what are the other elements that motivate residents to actually minimize waste, not just having the capacity in the bin and wanting to do that.
Thank you. I just want to take a moment to see if our councillors have anything they'd like to add to this discussion. So maybe if any of our councillors would like to put the hand up or to jump into the conversation and talk about a little bit more around what else council's doing to try and get zero waste other than the proposal to move to rates funded service.
Carol, if I could start, I think one of the key points here is the food waste bins, and there's a lot of misunderstanding around that. Currently, if it's not a food waste service and people don't compost, a lot more of the food waste ends up in landfill. So this food waste service is trying to reduce that and put the repurpose that food waste into products that are useful to the community per se and to business. The other point, of course, is as the city intensifies, there is less room for garden space, and we're seeing that particularly in areas now with terraced housing, 2 stories and 3 more, another third story in the future going forward. So the intent with our building consents show that. So we're going through a paradigm change in the way we live in the city. So that's going to have a big impact on what we can do with our sections. So perhaps Parul would like to add some more, one of the other staff members in the Waste, to add some more information to that point.
Thank you, Councillor Cashmore. And Councillor Coombe, you want to jump in first?
Kia ora, thank you, and really good to be at this discussion. I just wanted to make a similar point to the Deputy Mayor about providing services that put us on a pathway to zero waste, and providing the service that has the greatest coverage and at the greatest level of service for as many people as possible. And I always learn a lot through the discussions with the waste team, and it's great that we've just got such a group of experts on the call, because one thing I have learned a lot about is just, there's always going to be outliers in terms of families who need to put out huge amounts of waste, because there might be larger families or individuals who might really be able to cut right down on their waste, and particularly with composting. But if we design a service that is for those outliers, it means it's going to make it harder for us overall to get to zero waste, makes the services for the big kind of bulk of residents in the middle more expensive. And so I guess that would be something that perhaps there could be a comment from Parul, maybe just to kind of highlight how that works and how we are looking to try and not only what Councillor Desley said in terms of it's also being the most cost-effective service, which is what this is, but also the most effective approach that will actually put us on the pathway to reducing emissions, even if some things might be a bit counterintuitive, like if you compost, but you still might have to pay, you're going to have to pay for the food scraps collection, or if you can really reduce your landfill bin to the smallest quantity, but still having to pay the rates charge. So I think I was trying to be complimentary to the deputy mayor's comment, because I think it's all sort of the same context.
Thank you, Councillor. Parul, did you want to jump in?
I think Councillor Coombe and Deputy Mayor Cashmore have probably nailed it in terms of what they were talking about there. And what we are looking at is what is a service that is efficient, easy, and affordable in the context that we are today. And the outliers, we actually really applaud people who are doing the right thing and putting out least amount of rubbish. But then, as we know, there's a big chunk in the middle that is not doing that. What else can we do to make that chunk actually shift their waste behaviors? I think there's a question in the chat which I was just asking, what else are we doing? How do we minimize waste going to landfill? I think there's a lot of work that's happening together with central government. We are looking at schemes that will enable residents to do it easy. How about not having too much packaging? That comes up all the time. What schemes can we put in place to have your containers going back and getting recycled well? So why not look at a container return scheme? There is so much more that can be done that sets systems to make it easier for residents to do the right thing. And the education layer sits over it. We do a lot of work with our community partners that work with families on the ground to say how to kind of work with them to say how can they reduce the rubbish that they're producing. So I think the work that we need to do is at every level, which we are doing now. I just want to also add, as we're working on a big chunk of waste that goes to landfill is construction and demolition. And that is something that needs its focused attention. How do we work with developers? How do we work with construction companies to do the right thing? Which I have to say over the last few years has had a shift, which is quite heartening to see.
Thank you, Parul. Before we move on to the next question, has anyone else got something to add? Sarah, were you about to contribute to that topic?
No, I was just agreeing with Parul around the issue around construction and demolition waste and the sort of paradigm shift that we've actually seen through major developers choosing deconstruction over demolition now, and that's really heartening to see. So just agreeing with that point.
Thank you. So the next question we've got is really about how do we how can we understand our waste services? So what are the differences in waste generation and generation in different socioeconomic areas? Is anyone able to answer that question for us?
I could take that one. I'll start with one. We do know that there are various factors that do drive waste behaviours and lead to increased waste. And we do know that larger households produce more waste, not just waste per capita, but more waste overall. We also know that households in lower socioeconomic, with lower incomes also tend to produce more waste. And we also know that those households who potentially are renting have the potential to produce more waste as well, due to the fact that they are forced to buy cheaper products, due to the fact that they are forced to buy through their available income, and also because they are moving more often, and when you move, waste is produced. So we do know that there are factors relating to socioeconomic factors that do cause people on in those lower deciles to produce more waste. So we do need to account for that, and we do need to work closely with those communities to make sure that we provide them with the tools and we provide them with the opportunities to produce less waste. Interestingly, we've done a lot of work with Kāinga Ora throughout the development of throughout our research, and they were firmly of the opinion that they would support a rates-funded service where they knew that their residents weren't having to think each week whether or not they could afford to buy a tag or a loaf of bread. So it was even coming down to that level of basic income. They felt that they're knowing that cost is not the only factor that drives waste minimisation. Say there are people in both rates-funded areas and PAYT areas that are driven to minimise their waste, but not having to have that hanging over their head as to make that choice really would help them have that headspace to be able to think about waste minimisation overall.
Thank you to the staff team. I'm just wondering here again if any of the councillors would like to add anything to this discussion.
There is a question from Bonnie Cohen there. I think that's been at the end there where I live. There's currently no rubbish collection on my street.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that one. I just wanted to check if any of the councillors had anything to add to the discussion around different socioeconomic areas, and I guess looking at it from an equity lens. And if not, that's fine. We'll go on to the next set of questions.
Sorry, I'll just jump in really quickly. Just something to kind of weigh up in terms of when you're providing your feedback is that for rates funded services, obviously those are paid by the property owner, whereas for PAYT bin tags, they're paid directly by the user, which could be a renter. Now, whether you believe that charge will be loaded on to rents or not, that's something to kind of think about as well. So just thinking about it will be a slightly different method of payment as opposed to who pays as well. So that's something to kind of put into your feedback and your thinking.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. So going back to the questions, so we do have one from Bonnie, which talks about there being no current rubbish collection in the area she lives. This has been okay because of the lightweight bags which we can lift. How do you propose to collect our rubbish, i.e. committing to collecting on our street? Not quite sure where you live, Bonnie, but I'm guessing you must be in one of the rural areas. So one of the team like to answer that?
Yes, I can take that, Carol. Yes, I'm not sure where you live, Bonnie, but with the rates funded, under the rates funded proposal, that service will be available to all properties in the region. And what we do have is in the rural areas, you've got a choice of a bin or a bag because there may be terrain that you can't really utilize a bin and you will have the choice of the bag. Even within the urban areas, if there are properties that have got real steep, if the location is steep and it's a health and safety risk, we do provide exceptions in terms of bag collections as well. But the idea is to have more bin collections because they are safer from a health and safety perspective for our collectors, and also mainly for our collectors, and also they avoid any dog strike and other things that happen to rubbish sitting in bags on curbside. But as I said, if there is a health and safety reason, then it is a bag collection, and rural properties will have that option as well.
Thank you, Purl.
Could I come in with an extra point there in terms of those hard to reach areas? One of the points of having a region-wide rates funded policy is that even those geographically hard to reach and potentially unprofitable areas will be charged at the same price as the more urban areas. So one of the advantages of having that rates funded service is that it's the same price for everybody across the region, no matter what the additional cost is at. That's by having everybody on the same system, we're able to spread those costs across all residents for the same price.
Thank you, Sarah. So the next question is really around how are we going to track whether this is working? So once implemented, will you be assessing whether the rates funded services is actually minimising waste?
As per the waste plan, we do monitor how we are tracking towards the goal of zero waste. So that will continue to happen. And as I said, it is, there are a lot more initiatives that are in the waste plan to get us there in terms of zero waste. That will have an impact on residential collections as well. Anything that changes from central government's perspective, whether it's a container return scheme or any other product stewardship schemes, will have an impact on what goes in the bin. So we will continue to monitor tonnages that are going to landfill.
Thank you, Purl. So keep the questions coming. We've still got a few in our chat box, but please do keep adding your questions to the system and we'll get through as many as we can this evening. The next question is a follow-up question. We've already talked a little bit about what we do to try and reduce, to educate people around waste. Does the council provide education programs on waste and waste minimisation? So let's explore that a little bit deeper, please.
Yes, we do. That's the short answer, but I could talk a little bit about what that looks like. So as I mentioned before, we have contracts with our community partners. So these are organizations that are embedded in the community, and they then provide awareness or education programs to those local communities. So that's the best way to engage with local households and neighborhoods on waste minimization. We also have a program called Compost Collective. Some of you may have heard about that, which is getting people interested in composting on their properties. So we do initiatives that we also have programs like Love Food, Hate Waste. So anything that will make you think about not producing waste in the first place is the main goal of that program. So there is a list of others, like I think there's one promoting cloth nappies, which helps new parents with the rubbish that your disposable nappies can create. So there's lots in there. We also do, I think we're running a campaign right now on Recycling Right, which is pretty cool as well, because there is a need for reminding people how to do things correctly so that we don't contaminate recycling or put recyclables in rubbish. There's a little bit of a long list. I must have forgotten a few, but yeah, that's just to get the discount on it. And then I guess if there are households that can't deal through their food scraps, then we can put it out for collection. So I think we will continue. I know we will continue to have the tiered approach where we get people to not only reduce, but also recycle food scraps.
Thank you, Parul. Just checking, Sarah, if you were going to jump in there as well, but it looks like you're satisfied with Parul's response.
Yes, very.
Great, thank you. So the next question is, I'm not sure if we've answered this already. What was the difference between per capita collections via the council system and private collections? Do we have the data for that?
Yes, we do. We do collect data pretty frequently, and we not only collect data on what council customers are setting out, but we do occasionally survey private bins as well. And we do try and understand how many private customers are using larger bins, 240 litre bins compared to council customers, because that gives us a really good understanding of, I guess the different way that services are marketed to the community. So so we do find that some private customers tend to take a 240 litre bin instead of the average council size bin, which is a 120. And so there are some different tonnages coming from private customers, some slightly higher frequency of those 240 litre bins. So there are differences between private and council customers for sure.
Thank you. The next question we've got is around whether the charges apply to holiday homes and beach houses. I think that might be a question for Andrew to respond to.
Yes, the charges will apply to all the properties.
Thank you.
I would make the point that these are proposals that the council's consulting on, and the councillors will want to hear all the issues that you've raised today so that they can consider that when they're making their final decision.
Thank you, Andrew. I just want to take a moment again to pause to see if any of the councillors have anything they'd like to contribute to the discussion at this stage before we go back to more questions.
Just like to inform the people who are on the call tonight, and Paul might want to give some more evidence around this, is the council's been working for a number of years with Wellington, with the governments, to try and introduce a container deposit scheme for product stewardship. So things like your fridges, your computers, your mattress can go back to the person you purchased from, or from a dedicated person who will actually recycle that particular piece of material or that article into, everything can be recycled pretty much. And it's amazing when you go around to these recycling places what they can actually achieve out of, say, a laptop or a mattress. Large parts of it actually can be avoided from going to landfill and can be repurposed into other materials, other things, and recycled to be reused again. So there's an ongoing work with this, and I would say that Parul and her team have led the nation in some of this work. It's the same thing with landfill levies, increasing the cost of landfill levies to incentivize the construction sector, which make up around 80% of our landfill tonnages, to actually start looking at repurposing their materials, whether it's concrete, whether it's asphalt, whether it's steel or weatherboards. A lot of it can be repurposed. It is just a bit of a slow grind with Wellington to get them to move. And I'd love to speed up the pace, because this is an area where we can actually make a big difference to our environment.
Thank you, Councillor Cashmore. Any other thoughts from our councillors before we move back to the questions? Nope, that's all fine. So we'll go back to some more questions really around how well the process is working at the moment. So for the food bins, are the food scrap bins being used appropriately, and is a lot having to be thrown out?
I can come in there. No, I think the bins that we see that are being set out by the residents are being used appropriately, and the contamination levels are well within what can be. The thing that we looked at very seriously when we were looking at a processing plant going forward was taking that into consideration. So when we're procuring what kind of a processing plant would we look at for the food scraps, we considered what kind of contamination might end up in the bin, sometimes not by purpose, but it happens that you put your fork in or your spoons gone in, or other elements go into your food scraps bin. And we also looked at what is the process that will give us outputs that can be maximized and utilized. Hence, hence we chose the anaerobic digestion process, which enables us to deal with contamination, but also enables us to have the outputs being utilized. So a long answer to a short question, but yes, people are doing the right thing with their food scraps in the bins at the moment.
Thank you, Parul. And then a related question is really, how is it going to work in practice? Will it be merged with the recycling collection, or will it be a separate one? Is it everything going to be on the same day? How is that going to work in practice? What's the current thinking on that?
So as you would have seen in Sarah's slides, we've always talked about a 3-bin collection model that will get our curbside waste going to landfill down. It is a 23-litre bin, which is a much smaller bin size compared to what you see for your recycling or for your rubbish. And the intention is to have your food scraps bin collection every week. So you can put your bin out with your food scraps in and collect it every week. Your recycling will continue to be collected every fortnight. And the rubbish bin for the moment is collected weekly, which we are looking whether that can move to a fortnightly collection to maximize diversion into your recycling and your food scraps bin. So that would be a model collection on the curbside.
Thank you. And a related question around the food scraps is whether or not a Bokashi output can be put into the food scraps bins.
I may need to check that. That may be a bit of a technical question. We can check that and come back to the person who's asked it, unless they're anonymous.
No, we've got a contact. We've got a name for that one. Thank you. So then I have another question for probably for Andrew. Is any chance the rates funded service could start earlier if you're in an area like the North Shore?
I think that's more of a question for Parul and Sarah, who I'm sure are having this food scrap service rolled out as fast as they can. And similarly, the rates funded service for refuse can only start after the council has considered all the community's feedback on the proposal. And then Parul and Sarah will need time to ensure that they can get the contracts with the suppliers.
just to add to that, Carol, Andrew's right in terms of the process and the timeline that we would have indicated in the proposal is the anticipated timeframe that it will take, because we are still at a proposal stage. The decision needs to be made. Once that happens, our biggest work program at the moment is the rollout of the food scraps, and following that, there is a mobilization phase that would need to be undertaken to get that underway.
Thank you. Right, we are getting low on the number of questions we've got left. We still can take some more if you have any further questions for us. Just to remind people that this is obviously all a proposed way of dealing with our waste. Nothing is set in concrete. So I'd encourage you to provide your feedback on the draft annual budget before the 28th of March. We have a few more questions to go, but please do keep them coming. Scroll my way through them. Right, another one for waste. In the late 1990s in the Auckland region, councils that had a standard annual fee, residents produced about twice as much waste as those that had pay as you throw. What has caused the changes so that they are now almost the same?
I think the difference that we have seen over a period of time, one I would say is a shift in the container type. I would have thought the container that was provided for your rubbish collection was a bag, and we've seen a bag to the bin shift in this situation has, I think, put the tonnage going up. And I guess there's a logical reason why we moved from the bags to the bins, as I said, is due to health and safety, and also having the workforce to not being able to collect manual collections and doing automated collections. The other thing we have seen the flip on the other side, if we think about Manukau, where the tonnage has gone down, where they had unlimited number of bags to bins. So it's again the container that has made it become smaller compared to what's happened with in the pay-as-you-throw areas where you had bags and they've moved to bins. It may be I guess the demographic has changed in those areas as well, and I would invite Sarah or Alex to probably add to that. But I think that the shift has been because of what is the container type that is being used, and perhaps just people in that area are producing more as well. Sarah?
No, I would agree with that, and we have the international evidence that we looked at as well showed that the container type and the frequency of collection was a strong driver of the amount of waste produced by households, as well as some of those socio-economic factors that we discussed earlier.
Thank you. And we've got a follow-up question or a linked question in the chat box. What percentage of the pay-as-you-throw area is low income? Do we have any data on that?
We do have that data, but I might have to look into that, yeah, and take it up after the webinar.
Sure.
One thing I would add to that is that as far as was possible, we tried to match the relative income and the relative socio-economic sort of demographic in each of the pay-as-you-throw and rates funded areas, so that we could compare as far as possible, like with like. So we did actually look at the demographics and income levels and try to make sure that they were as comparable as possible between the two areas, so that it wasn't that would be factored out of what was driving the differences in waste between the two areas. And we can provide the data which shows how we match that.
Thank you. So we have a couple more questions in the box. So where will bins be stored in new developments which don't have space or don't have big driveways and they don't have very much open space? Any answers on that one, or any thoughts on how that might work in practice?
Shall I take that one again?
Yeah,
you can take
yeah, so I guess when we're talking about new developments, we are trying to ensure that waste is planned in. So there are some guidance and rules in the unitary plan which require a new development to have enough storage space for each unit to store their bins. And in some cases, they're able to store them in a communal area. So that's the outcome that we're constantly encouraging developers and planners to provide. Occasionally, the density of the development is too intense for council to be able to pick up those bins on the curb, and so in those cases, they're occasionally serviced by the private sector, and then they actually go onto the property and collect the bins from a communal storage area. So that's how we get around that problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. That's a really good question, and one that I have asked before, because in the past, in an apartment complex, often the rubbish bins have been in the garage. So there's a sort of a little corner or an annex in the garage, which is all marked out for cars that the bins have been able to go in. And of course, with the new planning laws, there won't be garages. So I think that is a really, really good question. And one that, you know, a lot of people might wonder about in the new planning rules, and I don't know whether Councillor Darby's online to comment more about that, but it's those practical things that we need to ensure are able to happen, which is why the multi-use site for a different type of rubbish collection as opposed to the individual bins is something that may come in. And really interesting for me is that, you know, your questions that you're asking tonight will have answers, and so people will be able to see those answers. And I just thank you for that question, because I think it's a very a one that a lot of people, including myself, have wondered about.
Thank you, Councillor.
Just to add to Councillor Simpson's, sorry, Councillor Darby.
Oh, look, just following up from my colleague, Councillor Simpson. So just the detail on the planning rules in response to government's MPS UD changes. They don't prohibit the provision of parking. They just don't require a developer. So I'm sure there's still going to be garages and driveways from those developers who choose to provide them. There's just not an edict as before. But Parul's team, maybe you want to expand Parul, because your team's done a lot of analysis on the need and how we provide and denser communities where, you know, apartment owners are sharing space and sharing storage space. Do you want to just expand on all the work you've been doing there, Parul, to land the outcomes that we expect to see in reality? Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Darby. And yes, you're right. We've been doing work with what we call the multi-unit developments, and just to see what kind of space they need right from the beginning when they're designing it, and making sure developers are across the and they're planning waste services in, because that's our biggest challenge, to make sure they think of waste when they're doing these designs. We also have services which are not your standard services. So as part of what council would look at or does at the moment look at providing is also larger bins. So every individual unit will not have a bin, but you could have a 660 litre that's placed in a communal area. So there are options there in terms of how we do it. And for food scraps, you will not have a 23 litre, but you could have an 80 litre bin that is shared between the people who are living in those spaces. So those are the kind of things that we are looking at that is already in play. But Sarah's team is also looking at how are other cities in the world dealing with this, because intensification is not just an Auckland problem. I think it's all over the world. So we will bring in more solutions that other cities might have got in play for Auckland as well. Sarah, anything you would like to add?
Yeah, just to mention that we have done a lot of work over the last year or so around that, designing in waste and ensuring we review as a waste planning team all applications that come in for 10 or more units, and there's a requirement under our waste bylaw for them to submit a waste plan as part of that planning resource consent application. So our team reviews that, makes sure that there's as far as possible an appropriate amount of space is given over to waste and for those future residents, and so it doesn't become a problem for them. And we're doing more and more work with the planning teams to ensure that our future developments are are fit for purpose in terms of provision of waste services. And as well, as Parul mentioned, those we're doing a lot of work as well at the moment on non-standard services for existing developments as well. So making sure that those are also fit for purpose. And also Andrew mentioned where council cannot provide that service, there is the option to opt out, and the private sector can provide that service if it is so bespoke and so beyond what we can provide. There will be the option. We're proposing that there's the option to opt out. So we have there's a suite of measures. There isn't a cookie cutter development option in Auckland. There are lots of different types of developments, and we just try to make sure that the way in which they're developed actually enables waste services to be provided.
Thank you for that very comprehensive answer to the question. Thank you to the whole team for that. Question for Andrew. How many household ratepayers on the shore will the new rate affect?
Around 80,000 residential properties on the North Shore who will be able to get the services Parul and Sarah have been talking about, and they will be paying the new rates.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm going to take one more question, and then I think maybe we'll do a little bit of a wrap up and go around our panel and get any final thoughts from them. So the last question, I think, referred to the international research you were talking about earlier. Is that Sarah or Alex? Are you able to explain what the international research you were referring to is or was?
Yes, when we were starting to pose the question, was the pay-as-you-throw system providing the results that we had hoped it would? We asked consultants Morrison Lowe, they are specialist waste consultants, to do a review of not only New Zealand cities but also international experience as to what the experience were in other areas using a mix of rates funded or pay as you throw system or type systems, or user pays or polluter pay systems. We can provide that, we can make that information available, but it's wide ranging, coming from sort of European, Australian and Canadian examples of where they had waste collection systems that were most similar to New Zealand and most relevant to New Zealand. So a lot of those examples came from Australia, Canada and Europe. We can provide the specifics on that as well. We did go far, wide and deep in looking at other examples to try and help us come to the proposal that we've come to.
Thank you, Sarah. I have got one more question I will pose to the group. How about emissions of all the trucks for the collections? Are you able to speak about that and whether that's should be a concern?
Alex, or I can speak to that one.
Yeah. So vehicle emissions are have been a key consideration in this recommendation. So at the moment in pay-as-you-throw areas, we have some areas that are, I guess, more attractive to the private market, and we can have some streets of Auckland that have as many as 5 different collectors that are running up and down those streets collecting maybe 2 or 3 bins, which is a really inefficient system and very intensive in terms of the carbon emissions. So by servicing the whole region with a rates funded service, we can ensure that each day of the week where there's collections happening, there's only 1 refuse vehicle, 1 recycling and food scraps truck servicing those areas. And we can also ensure that those routes that as they're planned are the most efficient routes, so that we don't have a lot of crisscrossing and backtracking occurring. And so we know that the rates funded model will actually be able to reduce those vehicle emissions in some areas by as many as 5-fold. So it's definitely a far more efficient vehicle emission system.
If I could add to that as well, The other benefit of having, of not having 5 collections down one street on the same day is obviously there's a huge community amenity and health and safety aspect to that as well. The vehicle emissions are, as Alex said, one aspect of those carbon savings, but a huge part of the carbon savings that come from that is by people diverting correctly, and we believe with that 3-bin service operated by council that we can encourage the correct use of each of the bins, both through food scraps and also correct use of recycling, and that is the really massive win that we believe from a carbon perspective that we can gain from having this 3-bin service. So correct people using each of those bins correctly can result in the equivalent of taking 75,000 cars off the road per year. So it's a really huge potential that we should be aiming towards as a city.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Alex. Right, so we're going to just go quick. We're getting quite close to the end of our tonight's webinar, so I just wanted to kind of outline the consultation information for those who aren't already aware. So many of you will probably already be aware, information is available not only online but also in your local libraries or service centres. If you found this evening's webinar useful, there are additional webinars taking place over the coming weeks for regional or local topics. Next week, we have a webinar on climate on Monday. We have one on finance on Wednesday and a Pacifica Whānau on Thursday. Local boards are also running online events or activities, so it's worth looking at our website to find out what other activities are taking place that you might wish to participate in. On the website, there's also an online budget tool, which challenges you to see the impact of different changes on rates. And then you can provide feedback directly through the website by email, by post, or using social media. So I'm going to take a moment to go back to our councillors to see if they've got any final thoughts before we start to draw things to an end. We probably do have time to take 1 or 2 more questions, but we'll start with the councillors first, and then we'll just see how we're getting on for time. I can see that Councillor Fletcher has her hand up. Would you like to make a comment, Councillor Fletcher?
Well, thank you. Can I just remind everyone that this is the mayoral proposal, and for myself, and I know most councillors, I'm not coming with any predetermination. We want to get this right. We have had excellent advice from our officers on this. I mean, I've got my own little hobby horse of just the amount of disposable nappies, you know, the amount, as we've already discussed, in terms of packaging. I bought a new coffee maker this week, and I just cannot believe the amount of rubbish that was generated from that one purchase. You know, I feel ashamed, actually. Had I realized how bad it was, I wouldn't have purchased that particular machine. There's discussion that we've had this evening around what's going on in the construction sector. I was very proud in 2000 when we got Britomart commenced with no waste. It was all being reused and recycled. But we need to get some momentum going on that. But I, for one, do not have a view on this. I've had great advice from the officers. I want to hear from you. I'm really looking forward to the submissions, and I want to thank so many people for participating this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Simpson, would you like to go next?
Yes, I'm happy to go next. Look, thank you very much for tuning in tonight. I think councillors have asked a lot of your questions of staff as part of the workshops that we've had, sort of getting to this point. But from my perspective, I just want to talk about the 4 E's, because the benefits of this are really under what I will call 4 E's. And the first one, I'm Chair of Finance, so the first one's about the money. So the rates-based service is more economical than pay-as-you-throw service on average, all right? So and that's, I think, is a good plus. The second E is ease. The choice of 3 rubbish bin sizes to suit your needs. I mean, we know that if you want to save money and you produce less waste, you can choose the smaller bin. But if you have a large family and you've just had triplets and you've got disposable nappies coming out your ears, you'll need a bigger bin. And so that option is there for you. So there is an ease, there is a choice. It's not you all have to have one size and one size fits all. That's not the case. The third E is, of course, around equity. And that means that is about standardising the service charges across the region so that everyone pays the same for their rubbish bins no matter where you live. So you're not saying it's more expensive in one part of Auckland than the other. Everyone has a reasonable size around equity. And the last one, which of course is very important in this era of caring for our environment, is around the emissions reduction. Reducing waste to landfill and our climate emissions. So by diverting food scraps from landfill and recycling properly, we estimate to reduce emissions by the equivalent of taking sort of 75,000 cars off Auckland's road each year. And that's significant. And then I think if you look at the story that Parul told you about the fact that we have all these empty trucks coming back from Reparoa, and we're able to actually use those trips that are already happening, is even better. So that's the plan, that's the outline, those are the benefits, and we want to hear your views. So thank you very much. That's it from me.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Any other councillors would like to make any final thoughts? Councillor Cashmore?
Yes, thanks, Carol. And all I'd like to say now is thank you so much for everyone who's been online. We're here to answer your questions as best we can, to hear different perspectives. We do have open minds about all aspects of council activity, as we have to do, in all fairness to everybody. Waste is an important part of our lives, whether we like it or not. We want to reduce it. We want to make it fit for repurposing. But think about all the other things that council provides that touches your life every day, and those are your family. Please talk to your family members about your consultation and the importance of the civic response. Talk to workmates, talk to relatives, because we need as many submissions as possible. We survive on the feedback from you to help make good decisions. And we thank you for your time and for your efforts on that behalf of your city. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Cashmore. Any final thoughts from any other councillors? If you'd like to make any closing comments, please put your hand up or jump in. If not, then I'll take this opportunity to say that if you do have any final questions, if members of the public have any final questions, please do put them in quickly into the Q&A session, because we will be closing the webinar fairly soon. Any questions we haven't answered this evening, we'll answer online and will be made available to the public. So I want to take this moment to thank all of our panelists this evening, our councillors for joining us this evening. We've had the Deputy Mayor, we've had Councillor Desley Simpson, Shane Henderson, Chris Darby, Christine Fletcher, Paul Young, Pippa Coombe and Efeso Collins, who've joined us this evening. Thank you for your time. Thank you to the staff for their time as well. We've had Barry Potter, Parul Sood, Sarah Leclerc, Alex Kirkham, and Andrew Duncan. So thank you for your time as well this evening. Thank you also to our moderators who've been keeping an eye on the questions and been dealing with the logistics behind the scenes. So thank you again for your support as well. So thank you once more to all of our attendees. As I've mentioned, all of the questions will be answered and posted along with the recording of this session on akhaveyoursay.nz/budget, where you can find all of the details about other events and find out more about the proposals, ask questions and have your say on the annual budget 2022 to 2023. It's been a great discussion this evening. I've heard that we had more questions tonight than we've had in all the other events we've had regionally so far. So thank you for that, your contributions. It's been great to have the discussion and to really dig into this topic in detail. So thank you all once again, and we'll leave you to enjoy the rest of your evening. Ka kite.